I sat in the bar with a beer, staring out the window at the waves rolling on the lake. The wind howled outside, but I knew it was only the prelude to the storm brewing in my life. At precisely 4:22 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, 22 minutes later than she said she would see me, a text buzzed into my phone. As expected, it was from my wife, or should I say, soon-to-be ex-wife. The message read, "Where are you?" The question was she that clueless, or did she think I was so attached to her that I'd just take everything she threw at me? What was I supposed to do? Ignore her, or at least get this mess started. I had already switched off my location services so she couldn't use the phone finder app, and I had paid for the hotel using my old credit card so she wouldn't see the hotel details in the bank app. I replied, "Gone. For good." Her response came immediately, WTF. A few minutes later, another text, "What do you mean? I'm back home and wanted to give you your present." I laughed. "A present?" I replied, "No thanks, what you've got to offer isn't a present anymore." My phone rang, but I cut the call. It rang again instantly, and I cut it off again. I sent another message, "There's nothing to discuss. You did what you did, and now I'm doing what I will do." Her reply took 20 minutes. Clearly, she had to take time to compose it. It said, "Dan, what do you mean? What are you going to do? This weekend was just some time for me. I explained everything to you. Now I'm back, and I want to give everything to you. I'm making dinner your favorite, spaghetti and meatballs. When can I expect you home?" I shook my head. She really hadn't listened all week, but she always had a tendency to zone out when she was obsessed with something. Oh well, her fault. "I'm Dan Simpson, and my wife is Marge. Yep, we've heard every joke in the book, and then some. We've been married for 3 years, but things between us have been off for a while. I thought the marriage was drifting toward the rocks until my wife grabbed the wheel and crashed us right into them. What I didn't know was that there was a snake in the grass, in the form of one of her co-workers. She, Jackie Devon, was the office party animal, and she'd been whispering into Marge's ear about how my wife needed some strange to spice up our sex life. The issue began last Sunday. Marge had been acting odd ever since she came home from work that Friday night. First, no after-work drinks. Normally, she'd get home at 7:30 p.m., 3 or 4 drinks in. It usually ended with a fight, and definitely no intimacy. But that night, she was home by 5:30 p.m. and made a lovely curry for dinner. She threw herself at me that night and again the next morning. Instead of going to the gym and shopping on Saturday morning, where she'd usually meet up with Jackie, she asked me to go shopping with her and have lunch together. Saturday night was the same, a nice meal and sex on tap. Then, on Sunday, she surprised me by saying, "Why don't you go play golf today? You haven't been out with the boys in ages." Not only was that unusual, but it was also worrying. She hated my friends and made sure and they knew it. I had stopped playing golf on Sundays about 4 months ago because the abuse got so bad I couldn't be bothered with it anymore. I could tell she was distracted by something. She spent a lot of time texting on her phone, wearing an anxious smile like she was trying to prove something to me. I decided to go golfing, but I left with a knot in my stomach. I knew I was coming back to something bad, but what would it be? By the time I finished the 18 holes, I wished I hadn't bothered. My friends ribbed me mercilessly for being henpecked. My game was so rusty it was painful to even watch, and the butterflies in my stomach about what I would find at home wouldn't go away. I had one soft drink and headed home as soon as I could. As I walked through the door, I could hear Marge on the phone. Before I could get close enough to hear anything, I caught her saying, "He's home, gotta go. I'll speak to you later then." She hung up. She turned to me with a big smile, but something was off. She asked, "Did you have a good game?" I wasn't going to play along anymore. I needed to get this out of the way. "So," I replied, "No, terrible. Is everything okay with you? Are you gearing up for a big post-dinner talk?" I knew I hit a nerve because the mask slipped and the smile vanished, replaced with a look of terror. I just turned and headed up the stairs, saying clearly, "You've got something planned, so I'm going to shower before your big reveal. You're full." I was being a bit of a jerk, but I knew this perfect wife act wasn't for my benefit, and I wanted her to know I knew it too. I was drying off when Marge walked into the bedroom. She said, "Come down when you're finished. I want to make a suggestion to you. We both know our marriage needs a reboot, and I think I've found it." Well, that was at least an improvement. For months, she had flatly refused to talk about our marriage. The problem was, did Marge come up with this solution herself, or did Jackie suggest it? If it was the latter, I had a bad feeling about it. Once I'd changed, I went downstairs and found her sitting in the office working on her computer. We had a large desk for 2, which meant we could both work on either side. My side had a desktop, printer, and trays. Hers had a laptop, printer, and a pile of junk, mostly magazines. I sat across from her, and she looked up at me and smiled. She started explaining her thought process. "You look refreshed. I was hoping to talk to you after dinner, but you beat me to it. You've been saying for months that our marriage is drifting, and I knew that too. but I didn't know what to do. Jackie noticed how down I was and got it out of me that I was worried about us. We talked, and she said she used some tricks to keep her marriage exciting. At this point, I held up my hand and interrupted. I thought Jackie had been divorced twice and said she'd never marry again. Is she really someone you want marriage advice from? Marge looked at me. For the first time since I walked in, I noticed she was wearing her glasses. Marge needed glasses but rarely wore them unless she was in deep thought. Clearly, this was serious for her. I just hoped it was sensible. She continued, both her husbands were older and a bit old-fashioned. I know you're more modern. Then she grabbed a magazine from the pile and flipped to a marked page. She handed it to me, saying, Jackie said she was going to use this with her second husband, but he couldn't see the benefits. I can though, and I'm sure you will too. I took the magazine but kept my eyes on Marge. She avoided eye contact and returned to her computer screen. As I looked down, I noticed several freshly printed pages on her printer. I first checked the magazine's cover. It was one of those women's magazines known for being a bit over the top. Marge didn't usually buy this type, she preferred gossip ones, so it had to be given to her. I checked the date, it was over a year old. I looked up again and saw her biting her bottom lip. When I made eye contact, she quickly averted her gaze back to the screen. She was terrified of my reaction. This wasn't shaping up well. I opened to the marked page and flipped it over. The headline told me how deep in trouble I was. It read, "The answer to a drifting marriage, cuckold your husband to get his juices flowing." I tossed the magazine across the desk, where it landed on Marge's keyboard. No, not a f-ing chance. She looked up at me, pleading, "Will you at least read it? There are case studies of how this works, and the results are amazing." Jackie said her second husband researched it, but he was just too old-fashioned. I was taking deep breaths, trying to calm down, but it wasn't working. I shouted, "Well, if rejecting this makes me old-fashioned, then I'm as old-fashioned as he was. Even suggesting this is grounds for divorce. If you go through with it, we're over. Done. Got it." Jackie said, "You'd be upset at first, but you need to see the benefits. I've shown you how happy I can be. This weekend was great, right? Doing this once a month will make every weekend like this." Her voice wavered between pleading and whining, which grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. I shook my head. "Marge, this weekend was fake. Not only will I not pay the price of turning you into a we, but I promise you, if you go through with this, I will walk out that door and never come back. No ifs, no buts, no therapy, no reconciliation. Do I need to be clearer?" She stood and picked up her printed pages. "Read these. They're from men who live this lifestyle. See how they're turned on. I think after the first weekend I'll be happy to show you if you want." As she spoke, she twirled her hair flirtatiously, but in the moment it made her look like a prostitute. I glanced at the pages. They were all from fetish websites. I started laughing. "You realize all of this is fiction, right? They're from guys with fantasies, not real experiences?" I took a deep breath and continued, "If I'm staying married to you, this isn't happening. If it does, we're over." She stood up, trying to take a commanding tone. "For God's sake, Dan, stop making this about you. We need to make our marriage exciting, and this is the fastest way to do it. I need some thrill, and you need something to push you. Jackie, Mel, and I are going to a hotel next weekend with 3 of Jackie's male friends. I met them this week, and they're going to fulfill my fantasies. I'll bring them back to you, and we'll share them together. I never thought you'd be so stubborn. This is happening. Dan, get with the program." After speaking, she walked out the door. I sat back down in the chair. I had 5 days to save my marriage. The question was, did I even want to? I ordered a pizza for myself. When it was delivered, I walked back into the office. Marge said, "I made dinner for you." I responded sarcastically, "Your food tastes bitter, just like your ultimatum." Then I closed and locked the door. I heard her try to open it. She shouted, "That wasn't an ultimatum, it was a well-researched proposal to make our marriage stronger." I ignored her. I stayed in the office for about 3 hours, researching Jackie, her other friend Mel, whom I'd never heard of or met, and who those 3 men might be. I also looked into divorce laws and my options if I needed to run if things got worse. I went out around 8 p.m., and sat in the family room watching TV. She tried to sit on my lap, but I didn't let her. Finally, she whispered in what was supposed to be a seductive voice, "I'm going to bed now, hoping you won't be far behind." I stayed up watching TV for a few more hours. I wanted to see if I could figure out what Jackie had been filling her head with. My first stop was her phone, but she had taken it to bed with her, which wasn't unusual. I went to the office and opened her laptop. In her email, I found all the links she had printed out came from Jackie, along with a list of talking points to present to me. Her laptop and phone were synced, so I saw an email she had sent from her phone about an hour ago while she was in bed. It read, "Things are worse than I expected. He won't even read the article, and he's threatening divorce. He flatly refuses to talk and won't come to bed even when I offered myself." Jackie responded, "Just keep it up. He's just being stupid, but maybe he's just masturbating." I waited as long as I could, but I was too tired and had to go to bed. I considered going to the guest room, but I knew she'd think I was pouting if I did. Then she would think all she had to do was get me back into bed for her plan to work. So I went to the master bedroom, changed, and got into bed. I was slowly drifting to sleep when Marge reached under the blanket and tried to grab my penis. I slapped her hand away and rolled halfway toward her. "No, thanks, we're not doing this until you drop this idea." She tried to reach for me again and said, "But how can I show you how amazing it is if you won't let me touch you?" It was time to head to the guest room. I got out of bed and said, "The thought of touching me while you're dreaming about cheating disgusts me. I don't want to touch you in any way. I'll sleep in the guest room. This bed is tainted with your dreams of infidelity." As I left the room, she jumped out of bed and yelled, No, it's not cheating if you know about it. It's for us. Come on, let's see how great it can be." I closed and locked the door as she tried the handle. Then I said, "Go away, Marge. I don't want to see you, let alone touch you." Monday went as expected. I left the house before she woke up and contacted a family lawyer to inform him of the situation. Our finances were fairly simple, no kids, the current house was rented. We had our eyes on a new house, but no contracts were signed yet. I made more money than she did, but alimony wasn't an issue since there were no kids and I paid the rent. I didn't need proof of adultery, so I asked for divorce papers to be filed based on irreconcilable differences due to unreasonable behavior. Next, I went to the bank, opened a new account for myself, and split the savings and investments evenly. Back at the office, I switched my salary account from the joint one to the new one. I also prepared letters to our landlord giving 1 month's notice and cancellation letters for all utilities. When I got home Monday evening, I found Marge wearing a tight t-shirt and loose shorts, clearly wanting to show off and give me easy access to whatever I wanted. I also smelled dinner. She never cooked on weekdays, so the pressure was on. When I walked in the door, she turned to speak, but I didn't look at her, just walked upstairs to the guest room, closed the door, and locked it securely behind me. I had remembered to take all the keys before leaving that morning, so there was no need to change the locks or barricade myself in. About 10 minutes later, I heard the doorknob being tried. Then there was a knock before Marge said, "Dan, dinner's ready, and I hope we can have a little love tonight." I lay on the bed and said, "Not hungry." "Did you cancel the weekend trip yet?" She cleared her throat and, with arrogance in her voice, answered, "Of course not. That's why I'm feeling so sexy. I can't wait to see you wave me off on Friday, and then see you sitting on the couch Sunday, waiting to hear all about it. Then claim me back and maybe get a little something extra from my girl. I'm feeling wet just thinking about it." I laughed. I didn't know why, but I knew it wasn't a pleasant laugh. "Marge, that's not happening. All you're doing is destroying our marriage. Go downstairs and think about what you're doing. I don't want to see you, and the thought of touching you makes me sick right now." She banged on the door, demanding, "Dan Simpson, get out here right now. This is important for our marriage. You need to start getting used to her." I didn't say anything, didn't move, but the worst part was, I didn't feel anything. I should have been sad, but I wasn't. I'd grieve for my marriage later. At that moment, I just wanted it over and started hoping she would go through with it so I could proceed with the divorce. Tuesday morning, I got up early and went into the master bathroom to shower. While I was in the shower, I heard the door being tried 2 or 3 times. Then I heard Marge say, "Dan, should we save water and shower together?" I didn't even reply. After a moment of silence, she banged on the door and screamed, "Damn it, Dan. This is supposed to turn you on and me on. Why are you like this?" I replied, "Because it disgusts me. I don't want to hear about your filthy fantasies." A few more seconds of silence. Then she said, "Hey Dan, here's what we're doing. I'm offering myself to you right now. If you don't want it, fine. I bet you'll be horny by Sunday night." I dried off, got dressed, and left the house without going near her. I checked the local real estate market on Tuesday and found a month-to-month rental apartment on the other side of town. I couldn't move in until the following Friday, so I booked a hotel in the mountains. It was winter, so the rates were cheap at this time of year. I scheduled my work for the following week and waited for the hammer to fall on my marriage. We avoided each other on Wednesday and Thursday. That was easy because I lived in the guest room. Thursday night, I printed and signed all the letters, attaching checks to cover costs until everything was done. Friday morning, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Marge to come downstairs. She walked into the kitchen with a handbag. When she saw me, her face lit up with a smile, and she approached me with her arms wide for a hug. She said, "I knew you'd be here to see me off. I hope you're just as excited as I am." I held out my hand to stop her from reaching me and replied, "I'm here to see if you're really going through with this plan. If you do, I'm walking out of the house and never coming back. Do you understand?" She was clearly angry and spat at me. "Dan, I expect you to be here at 4 p.m. on Sunday. This is how our marriage needs to evolve. If you're not here, I'm cutting you off for a month." I laughed at her delusions. You're not listening. If you do this, I'm cutting you off for life. I'll be home at 7 p.m. If you're not here, our marriage is history. I was useless at work all day. I left the office early and went to see the lawyer. He had finished all the paperwork and I showed him my bank account, confirming I had split everything. We agreed my wife would be served at 8 a.m. Monday at my old house. As I left the lawyer's office, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of my wife holding hands with a man standing at the check-in counter of a hotel I didn't recognize. The message said, "Time for you to become a cuckold. Suck it up, weakling." I gave it to the lawyer, and he made a copy. I went straight to the post office and sent the various letters. Then I returned to the old house, where I packed a bag with enough for a week. The rest I loaded into my car and drove to a short-term storage facility, where I rented a unit for a week and left all my belongings there. From there, I drove to a mountain hotel, checked in, and headed to the bar to begin the memorial for my broken marriage. As the rain poured down, pounding against the large window, and I felt the warmth of the fireplace and the heat from my glass of bourbon on the rocks, the first message pinged on my phone. I smiled when her second message came in. WTF, I wondered if she ever really thought I'd remain her husband. Did she really not understand me at all? A few minutes later, a message came from the same unknown number that had sent me the photo on Friday. The message read, "Hi Dan, it's Mel. Why haven't you come to pick up Marge? She's really confused and even said your stuff is gone from the house." I ignored the text, and 5 minutes later, the phone rang from the same number. I picked it up. "What do you want, Mel?" She hadn't expected me to be so curt, and she hesitated before regaining her composure and saying, "Dan, your wife is waiting for you here so you can take her back. What the hell are you doing?" I simply said, "That stupid woman has nothing I want or anything worth taking back. I told her if she did this, we'd be over. She did, so we're done." "Don't call again with that." I hung up. Another call came shortly after. This time the caller said, "Dan, it's Jackie. What do you mean by texting we're done?" I laughed. "What do you think it means?" Jackie, angry, replied, "Dan, I don't understand what that could possibly mean." I could only respond, "She'll know tomorrow," and then I hung up and turned off my phone. I turned my phone back on at 7:30 a.m. My lawyer would call me as soon as she was served. When the phone powered up, it was flooded with texts and voicemails. I counted at least 40 text messages, and my voicemail was full. I skimmed through them all from Marge, Mel, or Jackie. The last voicemail was from around 1 a.m., but the last text had come just 15 minutes earlier. I deleted all the texts but left the voicemails so she couldn't leave any more. At 8:05 a.m., my lawyer called. I answered, and he said, "She was served at precisely 8:01 a.m. this morning. 2 women were at the house with her. They tried to ask the server to take the documents back, but of course, he refused, advising her that she was legally obligated to accept them. Something should happen in the next few minutes." I thanked him and hung up. As I did, 3 new messages came in. The first was from Mel. "You heartless bastard." I ignored it but blocked her number. Sure enough, Jackie's next text was, "So you're just another dinosaur." I replied, "Yes," and blocked her number. Marge was the last one to text. She wrote, "Dan, I thought you agreed to this." I couldn't help but laugh. I replied, "I made it very clear that I did not agree with your plan, and if you continued, the marriage would end. Get a lawyer, and let's put an end to this meaningless marriage." I left the room and went downstairs for breakfast. The hotel was bustling, and the breakfast was great. I had just finished my coffee when the phone rang. I looked at the screen, thinking it was Marge, but it wasn't. It was my mother. I answered the call with, "Good morning, Mom. What are you up to today?" Her response didn't help. "What do you think? You think I'm going to accept you divorcing your wife? Get over yourself and go home to her. You need her, and she won't do this too often." I was stunned, hoping my mother would understand that I couldn't live with what she had done. I said, "Do you realize she went away for a week to cheat on me? Did she explain that she plans to do this regularly? If you think I can accept that, then you are not the woman who raised me with a moral compass and self-respect." She laughed and said, "This is the 21st century." I hung up. I wasn't taking that nonsense anymore. I was flooded with messages from various people. They were all almost identical, telling me to accept what she did and go home. I just blocked the numbers. By the end of the weekend, I left the hotel, went to the storage facility, and moved into my new apartment. I wasn't expecting to work on Monday. I'd been off the grid all week, but on Monday, people would know where to find me. I had a terrible feeling, so I called my boss and explained what had happened. He was shocked. Not just by what Marge had done, but by how many people had tried to pressure me into accepting it. I asked if I could work from home, and he agreed. At 10 a.m. on Monday, he called me and said, "This is ridiculous. Marge, your mother, and 2 or 3 other people have been calling the office every few minutes, demanding to speak with you. When we said you were working from home, they demanded your address. Now Marge and your mom are in the lobby, refusing to leave. You need to do something about this right now." I called my mother. She answered immediately. "Where are you? Why are you ignoring your wife? And why hasn't the divorce paperwork been withdrawn?" I took a deep breath. The divorce paperwork isn't going to be withdrawn, and I don't want to be with my soon-to-be ex-wife anymore. I'm working from my new place, and I'm going to file for a restraining order. She laughed and said, "You think that will bother me?" I chuckled back, "Maybe not, but the prison food you'll be eating just might." I hung up and called my lawyer. I gave him a full rundown and my boss's phone number. 2 hours later, my wife and my mother had been served restraining orders, keeping them 500 yards away from me, my workplace, and my new home. My lawyer had requested that my new address be kept confidential. At least that kept things quiet at the office, but they still called me 24/7, leaving me no choice but to block them. 3 months later, we were in court. Marge had hired a lawyer, and their plan was to fight the divorce. Her first strategy was to argue that her behavior wasn't unreasonable, claiming that the weekend getaway wasn't meant for sex. The photo and its caption shattered that, but they still made us authenticate the picture, and we actually had to track down the location. Fortunately, one of my lawyer's staff recognized the hotel, and we were able to get the hotel's security footage to authenticate the photo and the timing. My mother, Marge's friends, and even my sister all testified about why we should stay together. The hearing today was for them to testify and for Marge to petition for forced couples counseling. By this point, I'd had enough of the torment. Every time I went out, someone pressured me to get back together with Marge. I had been followed around the grocery store by an uncle she had reached out to, asking him to talk to me. Some of my Christian clients had reduced their orders with me, saying they wouldn't work with me until I returned to my marriage. I had even been assaulted by a neighbor on the street who tried to drag me back to Marge. No one knew, but I had applied for a new job over 600 miles away. I had accepted the position and quit my old job. My new job started in a week. I wasn't doing any counseling. She could run around all she wanted. The judge called the case, and Marge's lawyer started. He argued that we had been a happy couple, and that everyone who knew me thought I was making a huge mistake. He called my mother, my sister, and a few friends or former friends to the stand. They all testified about our marriage and pleaded with the judge to reject the divorce, or at least enforce marriage counseling, ordering me to participate in reconciliation. Then, Marge stood up and made a passionate plea to the judge. She began, "Your Honor, my husband and I have been together forever. We are the perfect couple. Both sides of our family see it, and we were going to build a loving, stable home for many children. Yes, I made a terrible mistake by listening to people I thought were friends. But now I realize they just wanted me to be like them. I beg you, please stop this divorce and send us to counseling. I know if Dan listens to me, his mother, and all our friends, he will see the progress I've made to fix this, the steps I've taken to ensure it never happens again, and the love I have for him and only him. Please, Your Honor, do not grant this divorce. Let him come back to me, and our marriage will be strong and lasting." As she sat down, I saw her wipe her eyes, and my mother leaned in, giving her a gentle hug before looking at me with a triumphant smile. I glanced at my lawyer, who shrugged. "He's going to force the issue now." I asked, "Will I get a chance to give a similar speech?" My lawyer nodded, then stood and said to the judge, "Your Honor, my client would like to address the court." The judge nodded, but then added, "Mr. Simpson, your wife has made a very warm and sincere plea to this court. Even in contested divorces, I rarely see or hear such love and trust. I want you to think about what you're doing. This woman truly believes you two have a future together, and I feel I have a role in trying to make that happen." My first thought was, "Oh God, the whole world is against me. Stop the world, I want to get off." I looked at the judge and made up my mind. Your Honor, her plea is for herself, but when she performed her little charade, she destroyed my love for her. If you force me into counseling, I'll tell them that, and I'll tell them reconciliation is impossible. I understand my wife, and she will believe that if you force us back together, I'll have to accept more weekends like this. I'm telling you right now, that will not happen. For the record, I'm moving out of state. As I said this, I saw my mother's head whip around toward me, and there was fire in her eyes. "And I'll be flying to my new home tomorrow. You cannot and will not force me back into a marriage I don't want. If you order counseling, I'll simply withdraw the divorce. I doubt I'll ever want to marry again, so this divorce is just a legal formality. If I do that, you can't force me to go to counseling, and you can't make me share a house with my ex-wife and she is my ex-wife. No matter what happens at this hearing, you can't make me love her either. If I drop the divorce, Marge will be left with the house and no support. So, Your Honor, what's the plan?" At this point, Marge and my mother were both crying, and her lawyer asked for a short recess while he spoke with his client. The judge granted a 30-minute recess, then instructed my lawyer to meet him in his chambers. I sat at the table with nothing to do but look around the courtroom. People were milling about, but Marge sat at the back, crying while having a quiet conversation with her lawyer. My lawyer returned. "The judge is really angry with you. He said you'd better not come back to his court again. If Marge requests counseling, he'll order it. But if you drop the divorce, he won't and can't stop you. He asked you to think carefully about your actions, but ultimately, it's your choice." When he finished, a court officer came out and spoke to Marge's lawyer. They talked, and he went back into the judge's chambers. About 10 minutes later, he returned and went to Marge. He whispered something, and she buried her face in her hands and nodded. My mother looked at me, and I could see the rage on her face. She started to stand, but her lawyer put his hand on her arm and firmly said, "Don't do it, Mrs. Simpson. This won't end well." The judge returned to the courtroom, and the hearing resumed. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Simpson, you've made your position clear. If I order counseling, you'll effectively leave your wife stranded with a lease. Of all possible outcomes, that would be the worst. So, Mrs. Simpson, for your benefit, I'm denying your counseling petition. I'm granting the divorce based on the financial situation presented by your attorney." Essentially, she got most of the savings. I didn't care, I was free. I heard the gavel fall, and I was out of my seat and out of the courtroom before anyone could get near me. I had a flight out the next morning at 6 a.m. and had booked a room at the airport hotel. Everything I owned was at my new apartment. My plan was to leave town as fast as possible so no one could find me. The taxi dropped me off at the hotel, and I spent the night in the room, ordering room service. My old phone number had long since been disconnected, so no one could track my phone or call me. But I knew my mother would terrify the entire town looking for me. She wouldn't let this go. I checked out of the hotel at 4 a.m. and was on the plane by 5:30. My new life stretched out in front of me. 6 years have passed since that day in court. My new job worked out well, and now I'm a senior manager in the technical department. I had just finished preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. I opened the door without looking through the peephole and found Marge and my mother standing in the hallway. I just stared at them. "So even now, you won't let me go." My mother practically pushed me aside as the two of them entered my house. I closed the door and followed them. Uninvited, they both sat down. My mother started, "All right, Dan, I think you've gotten over your little tantrum. We found you 6 weeks ago when you registered to vote in this town. Marge has found a new job in the area, and she'll be moving into this apartment. She needs you and you need her. I bet you're miserable without her." I just smiled when I heard the door open. Callie shouted, "I'm home," as she walked into the living room with a grin on her face. My mother, still wearing her triumphant smile, growled at me, "Who is that?" Meanwhile, Marge's face turned pale as Callie stood with her hands on her hips, looking at the two women staring at her. I said, "Callie, please meet my mother and my ex-wife. They just stopped by for a visit, but I think they'll be leaving soon." Callie turned to the side, giving them both a clear view of a very noticeable baby bump. I saw Marge raise her hand to her mouth. My mother could only ask, "Is it yours?" The smile on my face told her everything she needed to know. I said, "Don't worry, Callie makes sure I'm not miserable." With that, I took my mother's hand and said, "I think it's time for the two of you to return to your lives and leave me to mine. Goodbye." I ushered them both out the door and turned back to Callie. "Dinner's ready?" As the door closed behind Marge and my mother, I turned to Callie, my dear friend who had always helped me in difficult situations. She giggled and quickly slipped her hand under her shirt, pulling out the fake baby bump and restoring her usual slim figure. "You played that too well, I couldn't help but laugh. My mom and Marge probably can't breathe from the shock, but I'm sure my mom will be back tomorrow." Callie sat on the couch, tossing the fake bump onto the table with a mischievous grin. "No doubt. From the look on her face, she won't let this go." I sighed, pulling up a chair to sit across from Callie. "That's the problem. I need you to play along a bit longer to really make my mom believe we have some good news." Callie looked at me, raising an eyebrow playfully. "Oh, this won't be easy, you know. You think this act is free. I want a hefty reward." I raised an eyebrow, trying not to laugh. "All right, name your price. Consider me in your debt." Callie smiled, pointing at the food on the table. "Well, for starters, you can treat me to a nice dinner. As for the reward, I'll think of something later." "Deal," I replied, and we both burst into laughter, diving into the meal as if nothing dramatic had just happened. "But seriously," Callie said between bites, "you better prepare yourself for tomorrow. Your mom isn't going to let this go easily." I laughed loudly, but in the back of my mind I was already calculating my next move. The next morning, just as expected, my mother knocked on the door at the crack of dawn. I glanced at Callie, who was ready to jump back into character with the fake baby bump. She sighed, clutching her stomach dramatically, pretending to endure the discomfort of pregnancy. I'm really getting into this role, Callie whispered as I opened the door. I winked and smiled. Hang in there, just one more time. My mother walked in, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Callie. Seeing her sitting on the couch, one hand on her stomach, grimacing as if a wave of nausea had just hit, my mother couldn't hide her eagerness. Callie, are you all right? My mother asked quickly, her eyes filled with concern but also a hint of excitement. She sat down right next to her, while I smirked, sitting on the other side, gently patting Callie's fake belly in a caring manner, further convincing my mother. I'm fine, Mom, Callie replied, trying to keep a tired tone in her voice, though I could tell she was suppressing laughter. How long have you two been hiding this from me? My mother asked, her tone slightly scolding but clearly thrilled. I looked over at Callie and the two of us, as planned, responded enthusiastically. Well, we just found out recently, Mom. We wanted to wait until things were more stable before telling you. My mother shook her head, though her lips curled into a smile, unable to stay stern for long. You two are so stubborn. But oh well, there's no going back now. And she pointed at me. You'd better take good care of Callie, you hear me? I tried not to laugh, patting Callie's stomach once more, pretending to be full of affection. Yes, Mom, I'll take great care of her. My mother looked at both of us for a long moment before finally giving in to her excitement. Clearly, she had completely turned around and was now just looking forward to the grandchild she'd been waiting for. I've got to go prepare a few things, she said, suddenly standing up. Remember to take care of Callie. Don't let her do anything strenuous. With that, she hurried out, mumbling excitedly to herself about the baby on the way. As soon as the door closed, Callie and I exchanged glances and burst into laughter. That was a great performance, Callie said, rubbing her belly in relief, but don't forget the reward you promised. I nodded, unable to stop laughing. Don't worry, I won't forget. That night, after our perfect performance in front of my mother, Callie and I decided to celebrate our success with a round of drinks. We went to our usual spot, ordered a few rounds, and laughed endlessly about the ridiculousness of the day's events. Did you see your mom's face? Even professional actors couldn't have pulled it off better than we did. Callie laughed out loud, raising her glass. I nodded and clinked my glass with hers. I told you, the plan was flawless, but now I owe you big time. Of course you do, she giggled, then downed her drink. I expect a pretty grand reward for this. After a few more drinks, the atmosphere became more lively. The music in the bar grew louder, our laughter filled the room, and as the night grew later, the drinks kept flowing, and we fell deeper into stories and memories of our longtime friendship. No one noticed how much time had passed until we finally stood to leave. It was nearly midnight. Both of us were tipsy, but still laughing and joking like two carefree souls. On the way home, we kept talking and messing around, the cool night air sobering us up a bit. But our heads were still spinning with the buzz. I walked Callie to her door, thinking that it had been a long night and it was time for us to rest. All right, get inside. I'm heading home, I said, turning to leave. But before I could go, Callie suddenly grabbed my hand. Her eyes locked with mine, no longer playful but filled with something deeper and more real. Don't go, she whispered, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotions. I froze, meeting her gaze. The atmosphere between us shifted, no longer just friendly banter, no more casual laughter. There was something closer, more genuine, and with a touch of nervousness. Are you sure? I asked, my voice slightly hoarse. Callie didn't answer with words. She just pulled me inside, and suddenly we were lost in a long night of passion, leaving the boundaries of friendship behind. The rushed kisses, the urgent breaths, it was like we had entered a world where only the two of us existed. Nothing else mattered. That night, for the first time, we were no longer just two friends. The next morning I woke up with a pounding headache from the alcohol, realizing I was lying next to Callie. The memories of last night came flooding back, but instead of feeling like something had changed, we just looked at each other for a moment, and then shared a light laugh. All right then, I guess I should head home, I said, sitting up, trying to keep things as normal as possible. Callie shrugged, pulling the covers up. Yeah, let's pretend nothing happened. Back to being just friends. Just friends, I agreed, nodding. I put on my jacket, walked out the door, and didn't look back. No matter how intense things had been last night, we both understood that it had just been a moment of weakness, and we were content to move on with our separate lives. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Marge sat at her kitchen table with an opened utility bill. The balance in her bank account was dwindling, and life after the divorce wasn't as easy as she had imagined. How did my life end up like this? Marge muttered, clutching her head. Her finances were tight, and she was beginning to feel the weight of her struggling situation. News about me, her ex-husband, who seemed to be doing quite well after the divorce, only made Marge angrier. Especially after running into Callie the other day, she couldn't believe that I could move on so quickly. He can't possibly have forgotten about me this fast, she growled, clinging to the notion that my mother still had some fondness for her. Marge decided to visit my mother, thinking at least she would be on her side. But when she arrived, my mother greeted her with a cold stare. "Marge, what are you doing here?" my mother asked, standing firmly at the door. "Mama, I just wanted to talk. Maybe we can sort things out. After all, Dan and I did have some good times together." Marge forced a sweet smile. But my mother cut her off immediately. "There's no need for that. You made your choices, now live with them. Don't come here looking for anything anymore." Marge stood stunned, her smile fading. "But, you still care about me, don't you? I know you still have feelings for me." My mother scoffed, without hesitation. "Feelings? Feelings don't matter when you've betrayed Dan. Did you really think I would always take your side? Now go home and don't bother us again." Fuming but powerless, Marge spat, "You'll regret treating me like this," before storming off, leaving my mother to calmly shut the door behind her, unbothered by Marge's empty threats. 2 uneventful weeks passed. Marge continued to scramble to improve her financial situation, but living on her own wasn't easy. Money was getting tighter, and she had to cut back on expenses just to get by. One late afternoon, she stopped by the convenience store near her place to buy some cheap instant noodles. As she stood at the checkout, she suddenly noticed Callie standing right beside her. The belly she had seen bulging before was now strangely flat. Marge stared at Callie, unable to believe her eyes. "Where's that belly?" she wondered. Callie seemed oblivious, shopping as usual. Marge, seizing the opportunity, discreetly took out her phone and snapped a picture of Callie from behind, capturing what she believed to be proof that the pregnancy had been a fraud all along. With this evidence in hand, Marge couldn't contain her excitement. She rushed out of the store, not even caring about the noodles she had just bought, and headed straight to my mother's house. When my mother opened the door, Marge put on a tense and serious expression, as if she were delivering urgent news. "Mama, I need to talk to you. I think I've discovered something important." My mother raised an eyebrow, not hiding her irritation at seeing Marge at her doorstep again. "Marge, I told you I didn't want to see you again. Didn't you understand that the first time?" Marge grinned triumphantly and held up her phone. "Look at this. Callie has been lying to you and Dan. She's not pregnant. Just 2 weeks ago she had a huge belly. But now look, nothing." My mother glanced at the photo on Marge's phone, her face expressionless. But instead of reacting with anger, as Marge had hoped, my mother simply smiled faintly. "Marge," she said calmly, "I don't care about that. Callie's business is none of your concern. Your problem is that you can't let go." Marge was stunned, not believing what she was hearing. "But don't you see? She's been lying to Dan, to you." My mother raised an eyebrow, tilting her head with a serene calmness. "Even if that were true, it has nothing to do with you. Now go home, Marge. Don't come here again." Marge stood frozen in the doorway, seething but powerless to do anything other than turn around and leave, her heart full of bitterness and resentment. After Marge left, my mother stood still for a moment, thinking. Although she had said she didn't care, a seed of doubt had been planted. "Callie isn't pregnant," she mused, and quickly made a decision. She picked up her phone and called me. "Dan, I'm coming over to check on you and Callie. I just want to see how she's doing with that pregnancy. Maybe your wife needs some help." Hearing this, I knew things were about to get serious. I swallowed nervously, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, Mom, when are you coming?" "Callie and I are home." "I'll be there now," she answered curtly and hung up. Panicking, I immediately called Callie and quickly explained, "Callie, get over to my house now. Bring that fake belly. My mom's coming to check on you." Callie laughed on the other end, but hearing the urgency in my voice, she agreed. "All right, I'm on my way. But don't forget about my reward. I'm not doing this for free." 15 minutes later, Callie arrived at my place, the fake belly securely fastened under her loose maternity dress. We both sat in the living room, bracing ourselves for the confrontation to come. It wasn't long before my mother walked in with a warm smile, her eyes immediately darting to Callie's pregnant belly. She started with some polite small talk, not missing a chance to comment on how big Callie was getting. "Oh, Callie's belly is growing fast. You must be eating very well," she remarked. Callie smiled sweetly, placing a tender hand on the fake bump. "Yes, ma'am, I've been following your advice." I sat beside her, doing my best to hide my nerves, laughing along. "See, Mom, Callie is taking great care of herself." But my mother wasn't so easily fooled. After a few minutes of conversation, her tone suddenly shifted, her eyes narrowing slightly. "That's good. But I've heard some rumors lately that this belly isn't real." Callie and I exchanged quick glances, trying to stay calm. "Mom, you must have heard wrong," I said quickly, attempting to sound casual. Callie chimed in. "Yeah, someone must have misunderstood. Dan and I are both really excited about the baby." My mother raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything further. Instead, she stood up and walked closer to Callie, her eyes examining her from head to toe. She didn't speak, but her hand lightly touched Callie's belly, then suddenly pressed down gently. Callie flinched but tried to remain composed. However, my mother had already figured it out. "Callie," she said, her voice calm but stern, "take off the belly." Both Callie and I tried to deny it, but her piercing gaze saw through every lie. I know the truth. Don't deny it any longer. Hand it over. Callie sighed, realizing there was no way out. Silently, she stood, lifted her shirt slightly, and removed the fake belly, placing it on the table in front of my mother. My mother took a deep breath, her face filled with disappointment. She didn't say anything more, just looked at us with sadness before turning to leave the house. As she walked out the door, she said coldly, "Dan, I'm disappointed in both of you." The door closed behind her, leaving an oppressive silence hanging in the air. After my mother left, the atmosphere in the room became stifling and uncomfortably quiet. Callie and I looked at each other, unsure of what to say. The situation had been incredibly tense, and we were both exhausted. Just as I was about to break the heavy silence, Callie winced, clutching her stomach, and ran straight to the bathroom. I stood up, bewildered, watching her as she disappeared behind the door. I had no idea what was going on. The sound of her vomiting from behind the door made me frown. Maybe she had eaten something that didn't sit well with her. I walked over and knocked gently on the bathroom door. "Callie, are you okay? Do you need any help?" I asked, concerned. Inside, Callie coughed weakly and replied, "I'm fine. Must've been something I ate this morning. Don't worry." I sighed in relief but still waited until Callie emerged, her face pale. "Maybe you ate something bad earlier," I said, helping her to sit back on the couch. "How about I take you out for something light to eat?" Callie managed a tired smile and didn't refuse. "Yeah, that sounds good. The plan didn't really work out today anyway, but at least we can go eat." I chuckled, feeling lighter after the tense moment. "All right then, let's go. I still owe you a meal for helping me pull off that performance." We stepped out of the house, and although the day hadn't gone as planned, the upcoming meal would help us forget the stress of the situation. Deep down, I was grateful for Callie's willingness to help, though we both knew that these kinds of lies wouldn't be able to last forever. The next day, while I was working at the office and trying to focus on an important project, my phone suddenly buzzed. I glanced down and saw Callie's name on the screen. Smiling, I figured she was calling to talk about last night or maybe invite me out for dinner again. But as soon as I answered, I realized something was off. The voice on the other end wasn't Callie's. "Is this Dan?" a man's worried voice asked. "Yes, this is Dan. Who is this? What's going on?" I responded immediately, my heart beginning to race. "I'm Callie's neighbor. She just fainted in her yard. We called an ambulance and took her to the hospital. I saw your number in her recent calls, so I called you," the man explained. I felt like my chest was being squeezed. "I'm coming right now." I quickly hung up, rushed out of the office without a word, and sped to the hospital. When I arrived, breathless, I hurried to the reception desk, asking for Callie's condition. After a few tense minutes, they directed me to her room. My heart was pounding as I made my way there. When I entered, Callie was already in bed, looking weak but awake. A doctor stood beside her, speaking softly. I approached, concerned but trying to keep my voice calm. "Callie, are you all right?" The doctor turned to me and asked, "Are you her husband? There are a few things I need to discuss with you." I barely had time to react before the doctor continued. "Callie fainted due to dizziness and nausea, but there's nothing serious. She's just over 2 weeks pregnant." His words hit me like a lightning bolt. Pregnant? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Yes," the doctor confirmed, his tone calm but firm. "The nausea and dizziness are due to early pregnancy symptoms. You'll need to keep a close eye on her in the coming weeks." I stood there, stunned and speechless. This had been an act, a lie. But now, everything was unexpectedly real. Things had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. After receiving the doctor's advice, I could only nod, feeling overwhelmed with concern and confusion. I moved closer to the bed where Callie lay, looking pale. She seemed so fragile, her eyes half closed, and her weak appearance filled me with worry. I gently took her hand, feeling her cold skin as my heart raced. "Callie, are you okay?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anxiety clear in my eyes. Callie opened her eyes, looking at me through a haze, but she still managed a faint smile. "I'm fine, just a little shocked, that's all." I sighed and squeezed her hand tighter. "Why didn't you tell me about this? We should be facing this together, not you going through it all alone." She bit her lip, her eyes showing a hint of guilt and confusion. "Dan, I didn't mean to hide it. Everything happened so fast. We don't even love each other, remember? What happened between us was just a mistake, one night of drunkenness." I leaned closer, my eyes serious but full of determination. "Yes, we don't love each other. But this isn't just about us anymore, Callie. You can't face this alone. I'm not going to let you carry all this burden by yourself." Callie looked at me, shaking her head weakly. "But Dan, marrying just out of responsibility, how could that ever work? We can't live together forever without love." I smiled gently and stroked her hand. "Listen to me, Callie. We can get married first and fall in love later. Not all marriages start with love. We can build that over time. The most important thing right now is that you and the baby are taken care of. I won't let you go through this alone." Callie stared at me, clearly surprised by my resolve. "But Dan, I don't want you to feel forced." I interrupted her, my voice firm. "No one's forcing me. This is my decision, and I believe we can make it work. We'll face this together, and you don't need to be afraid. And the first thing we'll do after you're discharged is visit my mom and plan the wedding." Callie remained silent, her eyes unsure but slowly accepting. Even though she had her doubts, I knew this was the best path for both of us. The next morning, when Callie was feeling better and the doctor had cleared her to quered, I carefully helped her to the car. Although she had recovered a lot, I couldn't stop worrying about her with every step she took. Callie sat quietly in the passenger seat, her eyes betraying a bit of awkwardness, but she didn't say much. I understood she was still processing everything, but there was no rush. I would be by her side every step of the way. I drove slowly toward my mother's house, my mind racing with thoughts about how she would react. We had faked everything before, and now it was all real. When we arrived, I gently helped Callie out of the car, holding her hand tightly as if to reassure her that everything would be okay. She looked at me with some nervousness in her eyes, but I just smiled and nodded. We stepped inside, and my mother was already sitting there waiting. She was still upset with us for the deception, but when I made the announcement, she didn't believe it at first. However, seeing how serious Callie and I were, she broke into a proud and happy smile. "Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. What started as a lie turned into something real. What a surprise, but I'm so happy." I looked at my mother, feeling relieved that she had accepted everything so naturally and with such joy. "Mom, Callie and I have made a decision. We're getting married, and we want you to be there for this important moment." She laughed warmly, clapping her hands in excitement. "Good, good. The sooner the better. Let's get everything ready quickly." Callie stood there, giving a shy smile but gradually feeling the warmth of being welcomed into the family. I held her hand tighter, feeling lighter knowing that things were falling into place. My mother quickly dove into the planning, and before long, the wedding arrangements were in full swing. The wedding day arrived sooner than we had anticipated. Callie wore a pure white gown, looking radiant despite the lingering uncertainty. But seeing the assurance in my eyes and the support from my mother, she began to trust that things would turn out fine. I stood at the end of the aisle, full of hope for our new beginning. As Callie walked toward me, we exchanged a look, understanding that no words were needed. We had chosen to face the future together, and although love might not be fully present now, our sincerity and determination would help us overcome anything. The wedding was intimate and simple but filled with joy and understanding. My mother stood by, tears in her eyes as she watched her son find his partner in life. And Callie, though initially hesitant, finally smiled this time, a genuine smile, one that promised a hopeful future. We had started a new journey together, ready to face all challenges, and most importantly, we were committed to building a life of love, sincerity, and responsibility.